Neo-Soul consumers, demographics of African American Millennials.
There are about 45 million African Americans living in the U.S. today. 84% of those 25 years or older have at least a high school diploma. The median household income for African Americans is more than $35,000 per year compared to almost $52,000 nationally. 27% are poor compared to a national average of 14.5%, and 19% of those 25 years or older have at least a bachelor's degree. 10% of African American households have an annual income of $100,000 or more. 35% of African American households have an annual income of $50,000 or more. 54% of African American households reside in urban or suburban areas compared to a national average of 41%, and 71% of African Americans are voting age. African Americans represent about 14% of the U.S. population today, but by the year 2060, they will represent almost 18% of the U.S. population, with an estimated 75 million people. African Americans have a combined buying power of $1.2 trillion. This ranks 16th compared to the gross domestic product of the world's richest nations. If African Americans were a nation, they would rank just behind Mexico and ahead of Indonesia, the Netherlands, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Switzerland. Right now, 55% of African Americans live in the South. 54% of the adult African American population is female. 53% of the African American population is under the age of 35, and 52% of employed African Americans are female. Almost 40% of African Americans live in the 12 metropolitan areas shown here, with New York, Atlanta, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. having the largest African American populations. It's noteworthy that almost 9% of African American citizens live in New York City alone. In addition, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Dallas, and Houston lead the largest southern cities in regard to African American population. Taken together, almost 13% of African Americans live in these four cities. With regard to wealthy African Americans with incomes over $100,000 per year, 24% reside in Washington, D.C., 19% live in San Francisco, and 16% of wealthy African Americans live in New York and Boston, respectively. This graphic shows that with an average life expectancy of 74 years and a median age of 32 years, the typical African American consumer has about 42 years of effective buying power left in his or her lifetime. In comparison, the typical Hispanic consumer has almost 57 years, and a typical Asian American consumer has about 52 years of effective buying power left. This shows that African Americans represent about a third of a more than $3 trillion multi-ethnic consumer market that will change business as usual in the U.S. African American Millennials, or Neo-Souls, will be significant contributors to that change. Neo-Souls represent 40% of the African American population, roughly 18 million people between the ages of 18 and 44. 32% of them are married, while 50% of them have never been married. Their households are 127% more likely to include a single parent, usually a woman, and 16% of Neo-Soul households include at least one child under the age of 18. 85% of Neo-Souls live in urban metropolitan areas. 81% trust products advertised by Black media. 82% of total purchases in Neo-Soul households are major name brands. 73% of whites and 67% of Hispanics say Neo-Souls shape American culture. 40% of neo-soul women say they are trendsetters, and 18% of neo-soul income is spent on hair and beauty products.
The typical neo-soul is a 32-year-old brand-loyal, employed, unmarried woman who lives in a southern city in a household with 2 other people and a household income of about $35,000. She is mobile and socially connected via her smartphone, a deal seeker who likes discounts and new trends and sees herself as a trendsetter, as do those around her. She uses her smartphone to seek health and employment information, get entertainment, to make purchases, and to tell others online about stores she went to or about products and services she recently bought. Black businesses and corporate responsibility are important purchase factors for her. This unique neo-soul consumer profile is centered around 5 consumer imperatives: mobility, health, trendsetting, luxury, and culture. So how are neo-souls best described? They are adept smartphone users, brand-loyal deal seekers, receptive to advertising, trend-setting social networkers, and health and beauty conscious. They are also pioneer shoppers. They shop more but spend less. They support Black businesses. They're ready to buy and focused on luxury and have decades of expanding buying power. Over the next 4 decades, neo-soul consumers and the trends they set will dictate the course and development of music, fashion, television and movies, social media, health and beauty, consumer products, and urban culture and lifestyle. EbonIDEATION, Ethnic Marketing Consultants. For more information, visit us at DigiMechanix.com. DMX, DigiMechanix Advertising and Marketing Consultants.